Welcome to episode 8 of the Robot Report podcast, which brings conversations with robotics innovators straight to you. My name is Steve Crow, editor of the Robot Report, joined as always by senior editor Eugene Demetri. Gino, another busy day, another busy week for us here.
It is indeed. We got podcasts, webinars, we got Robo Business Direct, so there's always something to talk about.
Yeah, a lot to get to today as well. New episodes of the Robot Report podcast come out every Wednesday. You can find the episodes on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, SoundCloud, Spotify, YouTube, and anywhere you get your podcasts. Please subscribe today and leave us a review. A great show for you today. Interviews with Eric Nieves, the co-founder and CEO of Plus One Robotics, and Tom Ryden, the executive director of MassRobotics. Gene and I will also discuss some recent robotics headlines. But up first, our chat with Eric. Plus One recently unveiled a partnership with FedEx, where it deployed 4 parcel-handling robots at FedEx's Memphis hub. Gene, Aaron Prather of FedEx unveiled this project during his recent Robo Business Direct session with us a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because Aaron Prather at FedEx has been very clear about what the big commercial robotics users need from developers. And they've worked with a bunch of different companies. But Plus One, working with FedEx, is a big step forward for parcel handling. And again, you might think, oh, it's easy to just take an industrial robot arm and it moves things. But in fact, there's a lot that goes into that, including sensing and AI and the whole software model. And so it's really great to learn from Eric what the robots are actually doing and whether or not robotics as a service model is right for everyone. And spoiler, it's not, but we're going to get into that. And then obviously Plus One will talk about also its vision first approach.
Yeah, and Eric also told us that this is one of the first, if not the first, robotics project that's come out of a much larger initiative that FedEx has to, sort of update and automate a lot of its processes. So it's like 2 or 3% of all the parcels and packages that come through the Memphis hub at this time are, handled by robots. So it's such a low percentage and such a great opportunity for other robotics companies who might be listening to this. Eric also provides a little bit of business advice on how to deal with much larger companies like a FedEx. So here's our conversation with Eric Nieves, CEO and co-founder of Plus One Robotics. Eric, thanks for being here, sir. I know it's a busy time for everyone, but congrats on the partnership with FedEx.
Glad to be here. And yes, it's been a terrific partnership with FedEx, and glad to be able to talk about what we've been doing.
So for those who may not have seen the news, just tell the listeners about the project. What are the robots doing at FedEx's Memphis hub?
Right. So Memphis is FedEx's super hub, and it is the home of FedEx Express. So all of those absolutely positively have to be there overnight packages all go through Memphis. And they have installed 4 robots with the Plus One Vision system for automating some of the small sorts and supporting their associates in having those be able to deal with all of the volume that's going through the building. So imagine a conveyor that dumps in all of those sort of flat mailers and legal documents and such that you see FedEx handle every day. And now robots, and Yaskawa was the robot supplier on this project. The camera tells the robot where to pick. It picks up the parcels, the flat mailers, the jiffies, whatever they might be, and inducts them onto the sortation system. And we do that, for every sort they do.
So Eric, tell us a little bit about the challenges that you're helping to address, because obviously a lot of people think about the robot arm just reaching over, grabbing something and putting it somewhere else. But obviously Plus One is really helping to facilitate that.
Sure. I mean, the 3D vision is the enabling tech, right? I mean, industrial robots we've been working on for 40 years. Prior to Plus One, I spent 25 years at Yaskawa. So the industrial robot side, is well understood, but the supply chain applications are all predicated on variability, not repeatability, right? So it's almost orthogonal to manufacturing. So it's all perception driven, and it is having fast, reliable 3D vision that makes the application go. So you can imagine that the input stream is quite variable in these parcel applications. So the robot needs to discriminate, or the vision system has to be able to determine, out of this big mess, which is the next best pick to go, process. And you need to do that at rate, right? Coming from an industrial automation background, our mantra has always been, and never let the robot stop moving, right? Anytime the robot is paused for whatever reason, you're not getting value from that process. So that means that the vision system needs to do its work very, very quickly. And that's really where Plus One's effort has been, is in ensuring that the vision processing time is as short as can be found.
You guys are leading with your perception stack, which you were just talking about. You're pretty much gripper agnostic, I believe, and which is different from some, if not most, of the competitors that you guys are facing. Can you just talk about why you took that approach?
Yeah, it's because there is no universal gripper, right? As I think about material handling applications, and I just watch myself, and all of these associates perform these tasks, so many of them, either require two hands or they require changing the way that you do it. There is no one size fits all end effector. We are a long way from replicating what sits at the end of your wrist. What does that mean then? That means that the input stream better dictate the gripper, design. The same gripper that picks up shoe boxes is not the same gripper that picks up shoes. So if you start with your gripper, then you are necessarily locking yourself out of a number of applications out there. So we made the architectural decision at Plus One early on that we would be gripper agnostic. We would land whatever the gripper is, whether it's or multi cups, or whether it was actuated or parallel jaws, whatever it is, we would land that gripper in the correct position and orientation. And that's sort of the way that we abstracted away the complexity of the grasping.
Eric, as you're obviously abstracting that complexity, can you talk a little bit about training the vision system? Because again, you're trying to recognize not just a huge variety of physical objects, but also orientations, and things might be crumpled or reflective or all that. How did you train the system to be able to recognize those things and then know where to grasp them?
So yes, it would be swell if everything we ever had to deal with was a rectangular parallelepiped of some size, right?
Right.
We don't get that luxury. So you're right, poly bags and jiffy mailers and things of different sizes and geometries, you have to be able to tolerate those in the system. So the first thing is, do good work on 3D vision, right? Before you ever talk about AI, before you ever talk about reinforcement learning, whatever it might be, start with really strong vision pipelines. And that is core to what Plus One does, right? So Sean Edwards, my co-founder, and Paul Voss, the third co-founder, both of them came from Southwest Research Institute, where they were working on 3D vision. So, we felt strongly that we have to start with that first. Now, it is true that the variability of the input stream is such that you will encounter scenes that the robot has not experienced before. And how do you deal with that? And the way that we do that is by having a human in the loop, meaning the robot is working, it's highly autonomous, it's picking, it's placing, it's doing its thing at rate, all of that. And then it encounters a scene it doesn't understand. When that happens, the robot picks up the phone and phones a friend. It effectively connects over the cloud to what we call a crew chief, a human being, right? And we see what the robot sees. And the crew chief says, okay, I guess you've never seen one of these before or don't know how to pick it, but I would do it right about here. And we command it from remote. And the robot says, thank you very much, and goes back to work.
What do you call it? Casa de Plus One? Is that your nickname for it?
That's right. So Casa de Plus
it's
One.
It's not actually out of your house, though.
No. So you can visit our facility. But yes, we do have a chief station where we have the folks that are responsible for monitoring all these robots in the diaspora, and, the robots phone home. So, it's the flip side of the way most call centers work, right? In call centers, people phone and robots answer, right? All these chatbots. With Plus One, the robots are doing the calling and it's the people that are answering. Why? Because people and robots, and certainly at everything associated with 3D perception. And that's fundamental to the way Plus One views this problem. We say we've got a world-class vision pipeline, and no matter what we do, it will still never match a 4-year-old. So you'd better build human capacity into the system in a seamless way. And that's what a crew chief is. It's the, human element to have those robots be more fault tolerant, more capable, and to sort of bootstrap the learning in real time.
So do you ever see a point in time, whether it's 10 years from now, 20 years from now, whatever the time frame might be, where the perception capabilities of a robotic system catches up to that of a 4-year-old or someone even older like us?
It's a fair question. I don't see it happening in my lifetime, meaning the rest of my working career, right? Now, granted, I'm in my 50s, but for it to be true, so many things would have to break your way. And I just am dubious that the creativity of the people doing packaging, branding, design of, whatever the next parcel package is going to be, they're going to always be making it new, right? I've had this experience where we've had what we thought was a system running wonderfully, and then the same package, the same SKU was now in its holiday presentation, right? And threw the vision system for a loop. So those are the types of things that I believe will never end. We are always creating something new for the consumer. And so I believe the fundamental best way to deal with that is with a human in the loop. I mean, let's take it out of the warehouse for a minute, right? Because what we're talking about at Plus One is called supervised autonomy, right? Supervised autonomy is the sort of the term in the literature for what we do, which is let the robot run autonomously for the bulk of its cycles. And then when it needs help, it asks for it from a human, the supervisor. Supervised autonomy isn't new, right? Every international flight you've ever been on is an exercise in supervised autonomy. You had pilot control altitude, then you were on autopilot across the pond, and then you were in pilot control for the sticky bits of landing at Heathrow. It's supervised autonomy. It's just no one had brought it into the warehouse. And that's what Plus One is doing. And that's the reason the company is called Plus One, because we are convicted to our marrow that this network of robots becomes much more capable through the addition of a live human being. The Plus One is the person, that crew chief that sort of just makes it all go.
So, Eric, talking about how, obviously Plus One has this approach and it was not really been used in warehouses up to date. But can you talk a little bit about FedEx awarding you guys that contract? Because obviously there is a lot of competition in this space right now, even though people may be taking different approaches. How did you sort of stand out, or what was it about this approach that FedEx responded to?
No one comes to a vendor, talking about a technology approach. They just come with the problem, right? And what was the problem? The problem is e-commerce growth outstripping the ability of these parcel hubs to keep up with labor. What did Richard Smith say? That on any given night, there are 1,000 people short? So it was, how do we leverage the people that are in our building today and make them more effective and productive in the sort? And that was the issue. They came to Plus One because, first off, we were very aligned philosophically. Neither of us are in the business of trying to displace labor. There isn't enough labor to be had in growth with the growth dynamics that this e-commerce is, sort of putting everybody through. So we wanted to make sure that the folks that we're working with, and they felt likewise, are aligned that this is a people-centric, people-first approach. Next is, great, how quickly can you get these parcels through the system, and what tolerance do you have for the variability of the input stream? In other words, just like any other process, you're going to be measured on OEE, overall equipment effectiveness. What's its uptime? What's its throughput? What's its quality? And on those metrics is how the partnership moved forward.
Was there anything outside of that, though, that you think gave you guys an edge? I mean, take technology aside and the performance and the reliability of the product aside, just with your vast experience, and Sean and Paul, and I'm sure this isn't the first project that you've done with Scala since you've been at Plus One, but maybe that's not correct. But do you think, just from maybe how you guys handled yourself from a business perspective, did that help give you guys a leg up on the competition as well?
I think so, right? I mean, we're all old hand industrial robotics and industrial automation people, right? So we understand the sort of business piece that needs to be managed as well. We knew there were going to be SLAs and InfoSec policy and all of these sorts of things that needed to get managed. And, we've done that 1,000 times before we even started Plus One. And that's not just true of the founders. It, goes right on through our sales organization. Well, David, Sheffron is our sales leader, long time in industrial automation, long time in sort of 2.0, right? Which is AMRs and collaborative robots and such. He was at Rethink and then at Seagrid. So he was already working in the warehouse and understanding sort of the business cycle that these applications are going to, sort of put you through. So some of that just comes down to, how do you sell into this market, right? I mean, there are lots of folks that have sort of glommed on to the subscription model for the warehouse. And I get it, right? I mean, they have an operational expense problem. They cannot find enough labor, or that labor is sufficiently insecure because of, COVID or shelter in place orders or what have you. So, hey, you have an OpEx problem. Let's give you an OpEx solution. Pay us on a per pick basis or on a per hour basis, just like you would do labor. But the fact of the matter is, that doesn't work very well in this space. They are much more given to just taking and acquiring on CapEx and, see you in a year as the maintenance contract renews. And part of it is just how these solutions end up on the floor or on the mezzanine, as is the case here. And that is through system integration, right? System integration and system integrators are not going away. And a system integrator can't sell on a subscription basis. They need to acquire the components, engineer the system, deliver it in 22 or 24 weeks, get paid, and move on. And that just runs counter to this subscription model. So in the end, just sell the way the market wants to buy. That shouldn't be rocket science, but a lot of folks are sort of just hung up on the model of robots as a service. And, good luck to you. I think it does have a place. It's just not, where we are.
Eric, I think that it's a really interesting point because we've talked a lot about robotics as a service, or RaaS, and I think you bring up an interesting concept that it's not necessarily suitable for all applications or uses or industries, but even looking more specifically, obviously, at the FedEx case here, it sounds like there's a huge opportunity, even just in the facility that you're in now. Can you talk a little bit about the opportunities for growth there? And again, how their model is maybe not what people expect. People may expect, oh, why aren't they doing RaaS?
Yeah, so I won't pretend to speak for, FedEx themselves, but I know that, they've been public that, we didn't come this far to, stop now, right? Mm-hmm. We do expect have more deployments even within this year in that facility. And you can understand it, right? I mean, Memphis is a giant facility. And, if you are down that much labor on any given sort, well, you'd better do anything and everything in your power to leverage the folks you have. So these 4 robots are not an end unto themselves. FedEx has been public about undergoing the sort of modernization of the Memphis hub and ultimately the rest of the network. So, but they started where the nerve center is. So yes, will there be more Plus One systems in Memphis? The answer to that question is yes. And we'll continue to support them on an everyday basis with our crew chief support and, make sure that every one of those robots is hitting the cutoff times, right? At the end of the day, in the parcel world, it's about, making sure things are on the back door and in those trucks when they need to be. Anything we can do to support that is welcome.
Not to get back on the RaaS train too much here, but we're running a RaaS webinar on Thursday. You should come on and give like a
counterpoint,
little counter perspective on RaaS. That could be fun.
But I'd be happy to do it.
I want to ask you about Plus One in general. I believe, I'm looking at Crunchbase right now. Plus One Robotics has raised just under $11 million. I think you're somewhat of a smaller, on the smaller side as far as companies goes. I know you're based in San Antonio, recently opened up a new office, maybe late 2019. Just talk about some of the advantages of that. I mean, is your burn rate a lot lower than some of the other companies that are raising, somewhat large rounds of funding? And how are you able to maintain it, your flexibility?
Well, yes, we are. One of our 4 founding sort of principles is, frugality. And we punch way above our weight from a let's call it investment to traction ratio, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, some of it is, sure, we have a lower cost base here in than folks do on the coasts, but that's not really the big difference. The big difference is on the top line, right? It's in ensuring that we have built systems that, you know, folks need. What we value is not pilot projects. It's operational dependency. It's those folks that, you know, rely on our systems day after day to get the work done. Build that. And when you, you know, sort of focus in on those applications and those customers, you'll do well. You will be able to go a long way with, you know, a modicum of investment dollars. And then the other thing I would say to that is, man, not all dollars are created equal. You know, I sit at the, you know, sort of nexus of e-commerce and robotics. So as you pointed out, Steve, raising funding is not an issue, but it's making sure you pick the right dollars. And, you know, you said you were on Crunchbase, so you can see who sits around the boardroom for Plus One. We picked those investors that understood supply chain to a degree, you know, unprecedented in the space. So, Schematic Ventures, Pritzker Group, Dynamo Ventures, Zebra Ventures. These are the types of folks that, you know, saw what we were building and said, yes, this is the right approach. This is scalable. This solves a problem now. We can go vertical launch, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, in the spirit of don't take more money than you need, go get real customers, get revenue, and, you know, have those dollars. They'll take you a long way.
So Eric, you've been talking about obviously how demands on e-commerce, partially around the COVID-19 pandemic, have just led to this real spike in demand throughout supply chain and logistics for automation robotics. But looking ahead, you know, we're still sort of in the throes of the pandemic right now. But looking ahead, what do you see as sort of the longer term effects of all of this? Do you think that there's going to be sort of a continuing ramp up of demand, or, you know, and obviously a lot of people we've talked to are saying, oh, there's a greater acceptance of robotics than there was in the past. But what's your anticipation for the latter half of the year?
Yeah, all of that is true, Gene, right? So in the spirit of crises only accelerate, you know, trends and the inevitable, that's definitely what we've seen, right? We were doing all of these projects, FedEx included, pre-COVID.
Right.
And, you know, COVID in many ways had no impact on the timing of the FedEx project. But it certainly, the crisis has served to highlight that, wow, it's a good thing that we're bringing these tools in, because it is no longer far-fetched to think of a scenario where a mayor or a governor or the, you know, authorities say, sorry, we've got to go to shelter in place. And yes, these supply chain operators are deemed essential business, but there is a direct impact to the ability for labor to show up at the door. So, you know, what COVID has done is moved a lot of these sort of initiatives for automation and robotics and productivity, and has moved them from being managed and sort of, you know, championed by corporate R&D or innovation, et cetera, and instead has moved them right into the C-suite, because business continuity is a C-suite imperative. And they're looking at these now as business continuity. And that is going to remain the case post-COVID. Pre-COVID, we talked a lot about labor scarcity. It was a labor availability problem, growth outstripping supply of people to do the work. Now in the COVID era, it's labor insecurity. Yes, there is labor available right now, but we know it can be turned off in a minute. So it's insecure. So let's continue to move forward on the leverage automation can bring when it's done the right way.
And also
So
think about too,
macros are all favorable for, really all automation in the warehouse.
and what about, us as consumers? I know there's different levels of, some people are more paranoid about the virus than others and what have you until there's a vaccine. But, what about consumers wanting fewer people to touch their packages, right?
Yeah,
I think it's a big thing too. And I remember, we're pretty close with Aaron Prather from FedEx. And I believe, and I don't know the number off the top of my head, maybe you can speak to this, but it's still a very, very, very small percentage of packages that go through FedEx that are actually touched by a robot, right?
Oh, that's so true.
Isn't it like 2 or 3% or something, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be small. And that's as much a testimony to how big supply chain is.
Yeah, right.
Right? But yes, for every time the American consumer hits buy now, it starts a chain of no fewer than 22 touches of human labor before that shows up last mile. 22. And, some of it's, depending on segment, maybe a few less, some will be a few more, but just think in terms of 22 touches for every time you click yes. And all of these supply chain operators in that 22 are looking at their portion of that 22 and saying, how do I cut this in half? Right? Because that's, I think, ultimately what the American consumer is going to be pushing for. They're going to say, I want two things. I want fewer people touching my stuff, and I want assurances that those that do touch my stuff aren't sick. And you see that today. Walk into a warehouse. You can't just walk into a warehouse anymore. They're going to take your temperature at the door. They're going to have you, certify your condition and your health checkup and all of that before you can even get through the front lobby. And then once you are in, the consumer is going to want fewer people touching their orders. I mean, for all of the images that, COVID presented us, the one of them that, remains in my mind is the picture, and I don't remember what periodical it was, but of these apartment dwellers in New York City receiving their orders, their packages out in the hallway and opening them in the hallway with gloves and then just taking the contents themselves into their apartments and leaving the rest of it in the hallway. We can certainly understand that maybe that's an overreach. Maybe it's true that contagion doesn't last on these parcels and such. But man, it's really going to be difficult to convince the American consumer that all is well and, we can go back to things as they once were. I don't think that's going to happen. So everybody is trying to see how they can reduce or mitigate the number of touches in their portion of that supply chain.
And Eric, it's even about improving the working conditions in those warehouses, right? Because we've heard complaints from some of the big online retailers and 3PLs that, we're not able to wear masks, or we're not socially distanced, or whatever about the working conditions. So robots can also help with that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, and one of the ways that we've seen this play out was surprising to me, which is it's not unusual, if you're going to install robots, that you would install maybe the robots side by side and then the people, side by side. And now instead it's, hey, let's put the two robots in the middle and the people on the outside.
Right.
Right. Just as a way to naturally increase physical separation. Granted, there was no change to the throughput, right? There were no more items processed, but you changed the layout in such a way as to support distancing. And this is not a design constraint that we came into this with. But boy, you see all of these supply chain operators and logistics folks adding that into their thinking.
Final question before we let you go. Are there any, in Casa de Nieves, are there any robotic systems with your Plus One Robotics perception at work? Anything going on there?
Yeah, sort of the eat your own dog food kind of thing. No, we don't. But I can tell you that we have a really nice, customer experience center that I hope your listeners will just go to, either the YouTube channel or the website. You can kind of see a whole virtual tour of the facility and the different applications that we tackle and such. And, anybody finds themselves in South Central Texas is sure welcome to come by and see robots do what they do.
Yeah, so the website's plusonerobotics.com. Eric Nieves, co-founder, CEO, Plus One Robotics. Thanks for being here. And again, congrats. Keep up the great work.
I appreciate it. Be well.
Thanks again, Eric. Time now for a quick look at the news. Of course, to keep up with everything that's happening in the robotics world, check out our network of robotics sites, the Robot Report, Robotics Business Review, and Collaborative Robotics Trends. Up first, Gino, just announced this morning, Waymo and Fiat Chrysler announced an exclusive partnership. Fiat and Waymo have agreed to build a fleet of autonomous vans for Waymo Via, which is Waymo's goods delivery service. Waymo can still work with other partners on autonomous cars. But for the first time, Fiat Chrysler is allowed to use Waymo's self-driving technology across its own global portfolio. And, Fiat has pretty much lagged behind the competition in terms of in-house self-driving technology. But now it has access to some of the top, if not the top, self-driving technology in the world.
Well, and it shows that, for all the money that we've been tracking, all the funding and investment in self-driving and autonomous and driver assist technologies, that there's still a lot of jockeying for position. There's a lot going on. A lot of the self-driving companies, they'll work with the automakers to use their vehicles. But this is sort of the first time we see, or one of the first times we see something where it's more peers, right? We have Waymo, which is absolutely one of the top autonomous driving companies out there, and Fiat, which is catching up, but it's still one of the bigger automakers in the world. And so to have them as peers collaborating shows where things are heading.
I think you hit the nail on the head there. It's like a revolving door of partnerships, really, right? I mean,
yeah, really.
Waymo's had other partnerships before. One that comes to mind was their partnership with Jaguar. I think that's still ongoing, but it's sort of a revolving door of, these automakers who aren't the technology experts. They test one company's technology and see what it's all about, and then they go on to, somebody else. Just, I think it really does point to this stuff is just so far off. But, perhaps even more interesting, Gino, according to the Financial Times this morning, two people familiar with the partnership between Fiat and Waymo said this also ends Fiat's relationship with Aurora, right? So Aurora, for everyone, if you don't know, self-driving startup led by Chris Urmson, probably the guy when it comes to autonomous vehicles. I think he was involved at the DARPA Grand Challenge years ago. This could be a big blow to them. 13 months ago, Volkswagen also ended its relationship with Aurora as it invested in one of their rivals, Argo AI. Aurora also announced just yesterday, I believe, that their first commercial product will absolutely be in autonomous trucking. So again, another indication of self-driving cars, robo-taxis being far out as all these companies appear to be shifting to autonomous trucking.
Well, and I think, a lot of people will say, it's because of the pandemic, which is certainly in the short term changing driver habits in the short term. But I think it reflects how hard it is to really get to that level 4, level 5 autonomy. And, a couple of companies like Too Simple and Aurora are focusing on trucking, which is certainly a valid application, but one that is a very different set of things that you're looking for. Whereas passenger cars, whether they're for ride sharing or inner city travel, obviously there's a host of things that you need to solve there. And as we said, there's a lot of, whether it's a revolving door or a horse race or whatever metaphor you want to use, people are changing partners. It's like a square dance to see all these, the top 20 autonomous driving companies, which we track, and we know a lot of these people. We talked to Chris, Herms, and others. And, they are all trying to figure out, okay, what combination of technologies, what combination of companies is going to work here. Some are trying to do it on their own, but most of them are really trying to figure out, okay, how do we advance this? And it's interesting to watch because from week to week, month to month, it keeps changing.
Yeah, and I'm sort of skeptical about the autonomous trucking too, just from a safety standpoint. One of my fears just driving my car is, you're on the highway and you might be in the fast lane and you see these 18-wheelers right next to you, and it's very, very nerve-wracking, right?
Well, and imagine driving through like long haul across the US where you've got like double, even triple trailers, and that is certainly not the most exciting job for a human, but at the same time, that's a lot of mass moving at a pretty high speed, and it will still have to interact with human drivers no matter where it is. But I think it's going to be interesting to see how this develops. I do think trucking in some ways, I don't want to say it's easier, but I think it's a more straightforward problem than carrying passengers. But again, none of them has the silver bullet yet, or we all know about it.
I mean, it should be easier, right? I mean, it's basically they're not taking all these unprotected left turns, and they can stick to one or two lanes. So the technical challenges they have to solve have been minimized. But I always again from the safety aspect, I think of the do you remember the accident that Tracy Morgan, the comedian celebrity, got in?
Right, yeah.
I believe it was an 18-wheeler that was being driven for Walmart, I believe, and the driver fell asleep, and it all the signs point to the need for autonomous trucking technology, but just the devastation of that crash, of that accident, it just kind of sticks with me. And it's like, man, you got to really ensure that these things are foolproof. You know what I mean? Because if something happens, if one of these things does go rogue, if there's a failure on one of the technology side, or God forbid somebody hacks into these things, it's just the devastation of these rigs because they are so large. That certainly wouldn't be great. But Gene, speaking of carousels and revolving doors, delivery robots are back in the news again. Amazon Scout, which Amazon's version of a delivery robot, is coming to Atlanta and Franklin, Tennessee, adding to its testing locations. And I don't even know if did we work back? We were together in 2017. I don't know if you were at the conference, but as part of we used to have a relationship with CES where we'd run robotics conferences for them.
Yep.
And we did one back in 2017 on delivery robots, how this was the year that they were going to become mainstream. And
and we had them on stage with us, which was great.
Yeah.
I would say, again, delivery robots are certainly becoming more, there's more tests around the country. I did think it was a little bit interesting to say when Amazon announced it, they're like, okay, one of the reasons that we're doing this in the American South is that we want to have a different climate than we have in the Pacific Northwest, which I'm not sure that, heat versus rain, we're in Boston, and it's like, well, when you come up to a place full of potholes and snow, then we'll talk. But at the same time, they are, like many other companies, they are working on really steadily testing, and they mentioned they've already done tens of thousands of deliveries with Scout. So, when you order on Amazon, I would not expect a robot just yet, but they're getting close.
If anybody listening does some searching on Google or on Twitter, folks have shared some videos of these things. I think it was the Kiwi bot and others getting stuck in the snow. There was actually a great video yesterday. We shared it on the Robot Reports Twitter feed of a Starship robot getting tangled up in a fire hose.
Oh, really? Wow.
Fairfax, Virginia, while the fire department was trying to respond to an incident. Right? So they have to, it took a couple of seconds or whatever, but they had to untangle the robot from the fire hose and lift it off the ground so that the robot could get through and continue on its way to wherever it was going. So there's certainly, I'm just not sure it's the best format, the best form factor for what it's trying to do. And do the economics of delivery robots even work? Where I live, I'm a little bit out in Western Mass. I don't ever see it working, right? I don't ever see enough demand. So maybe if you relegate it to, cities, bigger cities, it would work. But also we've seen Starship and others deploy on corporate campuses, right?
Right. And I think we'll see them on corporate campuses. I think we're already seeing them on college campuses. You might see them in suburbs, but like you said, inner suburbs. I don't think that, if you live in an apartment in Manhattan, that a Starship robot is necessarily going to get to your door, right? And but at the same time, if you live in an outer suburb where the lots are quarter acre or bigger, the range on these robots is not yet sufficient, even with remote piloting or semi-autonomy. There's a whole range of things that have to be resolved. But Amazon and others are also working on drone delivery. They're working on indoor delivery. So there's a lot of things that have to be worked out yet.
So, sounds like we jumped the gun back in 2017, 2017, the year of the delivery robot. 2020, Gino? Year of the delivery robot or no?
2021 maybe. I would say this year let's face it, these are all still mostly in trials, right?
Yeah.
Or they're mostly in closed campuses. So, and maybe that will become a standard feature that you live on campus in college and you get your pizza delivered by a robot. I can see that, but for the average consumer who's ordering on Amazon, we're a little ways off.
I think it is safe to say, moving on to the next topic here, I think it is safe to say 2020, year of warehouse automation and, e-commerce automation with everything that's going on with the pandemic. Dexterity AI, another, company that makes picking robots, packing robots for warehouses, just raised a pretty massive Series A, around $56 million, Gino, and they claim their robots can pick more than 200 unique items in production with 99.5% accuracy. So I would love to see that in person. That's a pretty lofty claim, I think, 99.5%. But it pretty much contradicts, our conversation with Eric from Plus One Robotics. They were founded 3 years ago. They've only raised just under, I think it's $10.6 million, and they're trying to run a lean company. And here you have Dexterity AI, coming out of the gate with basically $60 million off the bat.
Well, that shows you that, one, the problem of piece picking in e-commerce has not been solved because there's a lot of people still going after it, right? To get that level of accuracy, that level of throughput that is even comparable to that of a human is taking a little bit longer, is a little more challenging than we've been hearing. And the other thing that's interesting here is that Dexterity AI, like Plus One, they're taking the intelligence approach, right? That it's great to have a variety of end effectors. It's great to have an industrial or collaborative robot arm. But at the end of the day, in order to pick a variety of items quickly and accurately, you need good software and machine learning to handle that. And so there's still, obviously, investors and the market are still saying, hey, we want this solved.
Speaking of startups, one thing we're looking to do here on the podcast from time to time is check in with the leading robotics clusters around the world, just to get some updates on, what's going on in their region, what's new since everything has sort of changed in the world. So today we're getting an update on the Massachusetts robotics ecosystem, which is the home cluster for Gene and I. I don't even know if that's a thing, Gene. I don't know if we just made something up, a home cluster, like a home team.
Well, we're based in Massachusetts, as it happens, and we're fortunate to be surrounded by a lot of robotics companies, and we've met a lot of them through Mass Robotics.
Yeah, so we're joined now by Tom Ryden. He's been the executive director of Mass Robotics since it launched in 2015. Mass Robotics is helping create and scale the next generation of successful robotics startups. They have a great space in downtown Boston, providing entrepreneurs, innovative startups with a workspace and the resources they need to develop, prototype, and commercialize their products. So, Tom, thanks for being here. It's been a while since we've last talked. How's everything going?
Yeah, so thanks for having me. It has been a while, and it's been a changing time, that's for sure. I think the last time we actually got together was probably the beginning of the year when we did our ribbon cutting for our new space.
That's right.
We opened another 25,000 square feet of space, and that was a great event. And then shortly after that, we had to shut down. So it has been an interesting couple of months, that's for sure.
What's going on with the space right now? I mean, I miss, you guys have a beautiful, spot to host some events and host some talks, right? A sort of a theater type setup, I guess. But what's going on with the space right now? The new space, the old space, are the startups back or?
Yeah, so we officially shut down in kind of end of March, and we're closed until June. Beginning of June is when we open back up. And so we implemented a lot of new processes, policies, procedures, tools to make the space as safe as possible. We have everything from ways that you can open the door without touching the handles. We have step-and poles. We have disinfectants on handles. We have temperature sensors now, so that when you walk in, you actually have your temperature taken at a standoff distance. And then, of course, we do distancing. We've taken out a lot of the chairs in our shared space, like in our kitchens and our conference rooms, to ensure that people will stay a good, safe distance apart. And we've actually closed down our event space, so we don't do any events now internally. We've transitioned over to virtual events. Yeah, it's been a lot of kind of tools to put in and let everybody know what we were doing. And we've slowly seen companies come back. Not everybody's come back. Not everybody feels comfortable, and we understand that. So some of our startups have decided to continue to work from home or wherever. But we've had probably about 25% of them have come back now and are working in the space.
And Tom, we look forward to being able to return to your space once you are able to have events again. Are you using any robots in the process of either disinfection or screening?
Yeah, so it's been interesting. We had one company that was looking at doing essentially putting a UVC disinfectant type of light on the end of an arm to go around and disinfect handles. I think some of that's changed a little bit. The transmission by touch is not as an important factor as by aerosol. So I think that's less important. But one of our companies who made a small AMR transitioned into the temperature sensor system that we're using now. So they actually took a bunch of their sensors off of their robot and made this unique sensor to do the standoff temperature detection. And it's a really neat system where you just stand in front, it tells you the proper distance, and it aligns you, takes your face image, and then calculates the temperature very accurately. And it's something that's pretty quick. You just walk right up to it, it scans you, and it's a way that we can just make sure that folks are adhering to the best policies and protocols, including taking temperature.
Maybe a couple more questions about COVID-19, and we'll get to some of the more positive things that you guys are doing right now. But you mentioned that I know what is it? The ventilator project is something that sort of stemmed out of COVID-19, as some robotic startups at your facility have come together and sort of gone in a little bit of a different direction for the time being. But overall, how do you think robotic startups that you've seen, that you've interacted with, how are they dealing with this? How are they adapting to it?
So let me go back to the ventilator project, because I think that's a great example, and then I'll answer your other question. But the ventilator project was essentially it's a new nonprofit that was started by two founders of two robotics companies that were in Mass Robotics. When the COVID, the pandemic started to really gain awareness, they recognized that they had the technology and the ability to build a lower cost ventilator. So can they take all of their knowledge of fluids and dynamics and other things, and then create a system that was a few $1,000s rather than $25,000? And they did that, and they got a bunch of volunteers. They used our space during the pandemic, so they're deemed essential, so they could continue to come into the space. And they have gone through and made this incredible, small, lightweight, compact ventilator that is currently being tested and going through the FDA approval process. So it's really exciting that they could pivot from what they were doing, but use their background and shared resources to build that product.
Well, and it's exciting to have these sort of innovative companies as part of Mass Robotics. We just announced last month our annual RVR 50 Innovation Award winners, and 14 out of the 50 were based in New England, including Mass Robotics as an organization. So congratulations.
Thank you.
But how do you see that this area, because there are other places with universities, there are other certainly other innovation hubs around the world, but what is it about Massachusetts that makes it special?
Yeah, so first, thank you very much for selecting Mass Robotics and recognizing the work we do, and the fact that you selected 14 other companies in the area as part of that Innovation 50. It truly is an amazing area, and I think one of the reasons that we have such a concentration of robotics companies, over 360 in the greater Boston area, is because of really the community and the ability for folks to really share knowledge, share their history in robotics to help their companies and other companies grow. We have an amazing amount of mentors that come out of some of the successful robotics companies that are willing to share their time and talent to help other companies grow. And so, folks out of what was Kiva now help 3 or 4 other robotics companies doing everything from this range indoor sensing for like a indoor GPS to all sorts of other technologies. And it's just great to see. And I think that's what makes this area so unique.
Yeah, we've been meaning to trace the family tree coming out of MIT, coming out of iRobot, coming out of Kiva, now Amazon. What's really interesting is that everybody seems to know everybody else, and it's been really interesting for us to follow.
Yeah. But back to Steve, back to your earlier question about kind of how startups are doing.
Yeah.
It's been an interesting time for a lot of them. Obviously, it's been a difficult time to really start to fundraise. I should say brand new. If you haven't fundraised before, starting in COVID, when you don't have the experience, you don't have the connections, that's been difficult. And we've been trying to help some of those companies make those connections. I think the ones that had fundraised before or had been known to the community, they have been successful. There is still continued to be funding. In fact, a couple of our companies, just Active Surgical, just closed on 15 million. So they're one of our residents, as well as Dive, which just closed on a loan to expand their production capabilities. So we are seeing companies secure funding even in this kind of even through the shutdown. We are concerned what's going to happen in the fall, because a number of the startups chose not to fundraise now and said, let's just tighten our belts. Let's be really cautious on our burn and see if we can make it until we get through this. And so there's a question of what will happen when I'm not sure we're going to get through the pandemic in the next couple of months, and these companies will probably have to fundraise. So I'm curious to see what's going to happen then.
So how are they connecting with investors? I mean, are they doing it, virtually, or are they still able to do sort of in-person demos with the investors? I mean, what's that whole back and forth going to look like?
Yeah, almost everything is virtual. We've had one company that actually closed on a small seed without seeing their investors physically,
Wow.
doing it virtually. I think that's hard. It's really hard for the investors to get a true sense of the company, and especially if they're doing hardware and they've got prototypes. Yes, you can videotape it, yes, you can show it, but it's another thing to really get in there and see these guys working. And so it does put them at a disadvantage. But I think the investors are recognizing that. Now that we're open, we're not open to guests, so it's really selected. But we will work with our startups if they need to have an investor come in and see something.
Can you tell us about, and you've dropped a few names already, but I believe you guys have added several startups since it's all hit. Who are some of the companies that we should be reaching out to, maybe inviting on as future guests? What are some of the startups you guys have added that you're excited about?
We've actually, so we were very concerned when we shut down about, how many companies would we lose if people recognize they can work from home or they got into financial difficulty. And I think we were very pleasantly surprised that we only we lost I think 2, which was not very many. We've actually added 7. So we're now over 50 startups that work out of Mass Robotics or have association with Mass Robotics, and that's really exciting. We added. See if I can remember. I probably won't remember them all, so it's always hard to do this. We added Spiral, technologies, and they're doing like AI to improve drone inspection of things like solar panel farms, which is really cool. I'm sorry, that was Aerospec. We've added them. We added Human Dynamics. They're a new MIT spin out that's doing work in again drone system, but adding manipulation to drones, which I think is really interesting. Nanomech, which is a new company that's doing some exciting work about adding robotics to life science and science type of technology products. Nextera is automating construction. And we had Ubrios, which is a startup that was out of WPI and just recently joined us to have a presence down here in Boston. And they are building soft grippers. And then Scalable, which is a really neat company that came out of some of the folks out of ABB and are really looking to do some improved software for programming and performance of industrial arms. So we've really added quite a variety. It's exciting to see some of the work in construction that's going on. We think that's an area that could really benefit from automation. We're also seeing some of the existing companies really get I don't want to say a benefit because that's always, it sounds bad, but I think the coronavirus has kind of highlighted the value of robotics in certain areas where you can use robots to do more of a hands-free or distanced work, or as we already talked about, a little bit of in inspection, in disinfecting, in other areas that they can help in. Companies are seeing traction in that, and of course, in the warehouse automation, that's going gangbusters, and that's e-commerce. Of course, has grown tremendously during the shutdown periods, and we see a number of our companies benefiting from that.
And Tom, you mentioned the growth of e-commerce, obviously in the midst of the global pandemic, and Massachusetts, again, is home to several autonomous mobile robot providers.
Yep.
Can you tell us a little bit about the technologies behind some of that? Because obviously sensing is something that has been improving. Before it was really prohibitive to get LiDAR into mobile robots. Can you talk a little bit about some of the technologies that you see that are improving?
Yeah, and I think obviously sensors, the cost of sensors, and the software to allow them to do the autonomous movement throughout any of these warehouses is an important factor. I think what's really exciting is some of the upper level software to do the planning, to do the optimization of fleets of robots. And so I think, when you could control one robot and have it go, by itself autonomously to one location, that's great. The ability to say, I'm going to put 50 or 100 robots on the floor and control them all and understand where each robot is and how it can best perform. A lot of these companies are approaching the problem differently. As we know, Kiva, now Amazon Robotics, moves the shelves, and Six Rivers and Locust have platforms that actually go to where the picking is, and rather than moving the shelves themselves. So they approach the problem differently, but the ability to scale, the ability to deploy multiple robots and have them optimized so that the robots are often going on a shorter distance because they can work together, that's exciting. But I think the next area that really is going to need some work is the interoperability, because now we're seeing floor cleaners and forklifts, autonomous floor cleaners, autonomous forklifts, autonomous warehouse pickers. All of these things want to work on that same floor at the same time. So I think it's going to be critical that interoperability is developed to allow these different types of robots to understand when one is in one area and when another can go in. So if I'm already picking in an aisle, I don't want the floor cleaner to come in and lock that, but maybe there's another time I can tell the floor cleaner to come back and clean that section of the aisle. And so that's an area that we think is something that needs to be worked on, and we've certainly heard. And in fact, I think you guys had a gentleman from FedEx on who mentioned this, and I think that's an important area.
Yeah, Aaron Prather, he talked a lot about sort of their Memphis hub and some of the new robotics and automation work that's going on down there. But what about also maybe an area of improvement? As I know, Mass Robotics recently ran a challenge with GM as well, or maybe that's still ongoing.
Yep.
I'm not sure, but what do you see happening in the gripping space?
Yeah, so we do, thanks for mentioning that. We do have a challenge, we're working with GM, and it's a specific challenge that is around gripping for sheet metal parts, and something that is hard to do currently for the types of products. And GM is looking for unique solutions to gripping that can do that. And there's more information on our website. Happy to share that with your viewers. It's an interesting approach of challenges as a way to highlight a specific problem and get resources from startups to really address a problem. You know, one of the things that we talk about at Mass Robotics all the time is that we see a lot of companies who want to get in and join Mass Robotics, and they have some really neat technology. And we spend a lot of time saying, okay, who is this technology for? What problem are you addressing? What market issue are you addressing? And a lot of them are like, wow, but it's really neat. And you know, people will buy it. I'm like, yeah, but you haven't told me who and why. When a company like GM, or we did an ADI, Analog Devices Challenge, we've done one with Mitsubishi, when those companies come and say, look, we have a specific problem, it would be great if you can get startups to work on it. You know that they're solving a problem that there's a market demand for. We think that's really exciting. It's a great way to drive some of these startups to be more focused and get them to understand how to work with either large companies or directly with customers early on. And I think that helps their development.
Yeah, and another market that comes to mind, again, you know, being in the Boston area, is healthcare, where again there's a lot of interest in the healthcare space. But another challenge that you guys have faced, because I know you've helped with international delegations, and obviously a lot of companies are not just serving a local or even national market, but international markets. Sure. How's it challenged with that now? Because travel and trade are restricted even more than before.
Yeah, so we have probably about 5 or 6 of our companies are based outside. Their home is essentially in another country, and they want to either work directly with companies here in Boston or attract talent or whatever. So they have an office here at Mass Robotics, and they have not been able to travel. So that makes it difficult. You know, it's the networking through the Zoom and other products. It's good, but it's just not the same. And in fact, we ran our first virtual investors event. We run twice a year. We do for residents only, an event where they get to work directly with VCs and other investors. And we did it virtually, and I think it worked out really well. But one of the things I recognize is a lot of times we'll have an investor in, and they'll be coming in to see a company, and they'll walk by another company and go, oh, I didn't know that company was doing this, that, or the other thing. And we make an introduction, they start chatting. It's really hard to do that virtually. It's hard to kind of walk around and see that you don't know what you're looking for, right? You don't have a specific company you have in mind. So how do you get them exposed to that? And we're working hard. I think the international companies are struggling with getting that same exposure here now that they are remote, but we're trying to do things for them as best we can.
We're talking with Tom Ryden, the Executive Director of Mass Robotics. Visit massrobotics.org to learn more about him. Tom, you talked a little bit about the growth of the cluster over the last few years. I think you mentioned 360 plus robotics companies, research institutions, and sort of other supporting tech companies. But what is Mass Robotics doing with its partners to ensure that growth continues in the future?
Yeah, so I think that there's a number of things that we are trying to accomplish to ensure that the growth continues. We talked a little bit about standards. We're going to continue to see that be helpful. I think early on when it was kind of an open market and all this was brand new, it's becoming more mature. There's more deployments, especially in factory automation, warehouse automation. And that leads to different challenges, different problems. Standardization is one that I think we're going to continue to help and push forward. it's raising the awareness of the problems themselves and the market demand and the issues and challenges. So we are going to continue to work very closely with our partners and other players in the market who have real demand and real need, and try to marry them up with startups. You know, we help our startups in a number of different ways, but really getting them exposed to the market, I think, is the number one way that we can help them succeed. And also in kind of the manufacturing side of it, it's one thing to develop a product, it's another to develop a prototype. It's another to transfer that to a product. I think a lot of companies don't recognize what they don't know to do that. And so we work with, you know, contract manufacturers and experts in testing and other areas, life cycle support, product support, all of those things that you do need to make a full product. And we're seeing that companies now are transitioning to product more quickly. Having those resources, I think, helps.
So, Tom, you've been working in the robotics industry for nearly 2 decades now,
Yep.
And you've seen all kinds of ups and downs. We're just on the latest curve on that roller coaster. But what advice would you have for someone who is looking at a startup right now? Because, you know, it is a challenging environment. You've mentioned a lot of great ideas around partnerships and understanding your market. But if you're at a robotics startup, what would you recommend right now?
Yeah, so it is a challenging time to do this, but the more time you can spend with your customers or potential customers in the field, the better. And that's something that we don't see happen as much as it should with some of these startups. I encourage them to talk, even if you're not able to go physically visit maybe a manufacturing plant right now to see the problem firsthand. Talk to them. You know, there's so many of these guys are open to saying, yeah, this is what I see on my factory floor. I need a robot to do this or that, and then really dive into why. Because a lot of times they'll understand the basics of the problem, but they won't understand the nuances, and that's what makes the robot succeed or not succeed. And I was at a manufacturer recently that was looking at adding some automation. And I was watching this person on the line that they were looking to help with some collaborative robots. And if you watch the person, they did a task very quickly, quite often, you know, just one after another. But every, I'm going to say 30 or 40 parts, they would take something and do something, and I missed it. And I said, what are they doing? And they said, what do you mean? And so we went back and looked, and every so often they had to deburr. They had to take this little piece. And so the person would grab it and just take it. Part of the production process, you hardly even saw it. It didn't really slow them down. But when we talk about automation, a robot's not going to be able to do that the way a human could do. And so you have to understand, is that a critical part of the problem you're trying to solve? How's the robot going to work with that? You're still going to need the human, and how are you going to transfer that part that doesn't pass inspection so that human can deburr that really quickly or whatever. So just really understanding the problem is what, you know, I try to encourage our startups to do.
Tom, you guys are hosting a lot of virtual events. You did a great series, I think it's called the Robot Stories, where you had some high school students, interviews, you know, Colin Angle, Mark Raybert, some other local robotics leaders. But talk to us about your virtual event series.
Yeah, thanks. So we have transferred from our in-person events to virtual, and we're doing what's called our signature series. So we did one right before we closed around logistics robotics. And we're doing 3 in the fall, one around robotics and defense, one around robotics and construction, and then one around robotics and manufacturing. And each of these, and it kind of goes along my previous point, the purpose of these events is to bring the customers and the technologists together. So to bring the startups and potentially the customers. On the defense one, we have folks from the Navy, from the Army, from Futures Command, from some of the local bases, as well as some of the innovation, the new DoD innovation centers, including DIU and some other ones. We have them getting together with the startups. Some of our demos are going to be live at Mass Robotics, but most are going to be virtual, and then most of the audience will be virtual. So we'll see how that works. We're going to do that. Same approach for construction, where we're working with some of the major construction companies in Boston. And then same in manufacturing. Manufacturing, we're actually having 3 or 4 manufacturers going to come in and kind of go over their challenges, and then have the startups talk about what they're developing. So it's a great opportunity for the users to learn about what technology is coming down the road, and also for the startups to learn about challenges.
Yeah, Gene and I certainly miss hanging out with you guys. So we look forward to getting back to those in-person events. For anybody listening that wants to learn about those upcoming events and the many other ways that Mass Robotics can help, please visit massrobotics.org. Tom Ryden, Executive Director of Mass Robotics, thanks again for joining us.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
That's going to do it for episode 8 of the Robot Report podcast. Thank you to Eric Nieves and Tom Ryden for joining us today, and thanks to everybody who listened. New episodes of the Robot Report podcast drop each and every Wednesday. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, SoundCloud, Spotify, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a review and smash that subscribe button. For Eugene Demetri, I'm Steve Crow. Have a great week, everyone. We'll talk to you again next Wednesday.